Hello everyone, and welcome back to Roblox U lessons. This is lesson number 2 in the advanced section for creating the game, the Mad Bloxxer. We are going to be making the tools today. So let's start out with the sword for the Mad Bloxxer. Where do we start when making a tool? Well, let's start by creating the tool, and to do that, let's go get a sword that we want to create it from. So let's search in the toolbox. We're going to search in models, and we're going to just search for, we're going to use the sword from Roblox Battle, so let's search for that. They all look pretty good, doesn't matter which one. This one says sword from Roblox Battle Original, so let's grab that one. So it asks if it wants to put in starter pack. I just said yes. That is what we want to do with it. So we're going to be changing this around quite a bit, and we're going to be coding it ourselves. So let's leave all the animations, let's leave all the sounds, let's get rid of this stuff. And the sword. You know what, let's do a test solo and play solo, and let's see how big the sword is. Make sure it's the right size and everything. Looks pretty good. And you can see I just removed all the scripts, so right now all your character does is equip it and unequip it. I can't swing it or anything, so we gotta let's do that. Let's code that. Reset. All right, so we're gonna need 3 things in here. We're gonna need a server script, so it's just a script. There it is. We're also going to need a local script, and we're going to need a remote event. So the local script is going to detect, it's going to change your mouse cursor for you and run some animations for you. The server script is going to do all the damage, all the hit collision checking, the damage, and it's going to tell the local script when to run animations. And the remote event is what the server script is going to use to communicate to the local script. So the server script is going to tell the remote event to tell the local script to run animations. So let's start off by naming these scripts so that when there's an error or when anything happens, we know what script it came from, because it displays the name of the script. So let's name this sword script, and this one's sword local script. So I like to start off by putting my name at the top of the script, just so when if anyone else is reading my code and they have a question or comment about it, they know who made it. So if you're making code, you should put your own name at the top. We're going to do the same thing for the local script. So if you don't know, if you type 2 dashes like this, it means it's a comment, so this code won't run. Any code that's green won't run. Okay, so inside the sword script, let's start off by defining the script.parent. So I like to use a variable sp. You could put whatever here. In fact, let's use tool. Lowercase preferably. Okay. It doesn't matter. You can name the variable anything. And this is just a shortcut to the script's parent, which would be the tool. And then one thing we're also going to need is probably the handle. So what we have to do is we're going to do wait for child. That's because there's some complicated networking that goes on when you join a game and when scripts start running. But sometimes the entire tool doesn't replicate, and the script will run before everything's there. So you gotta wait to make sure everything is there first. So we're going to wait for the handle, and then handle is going to be the handle when we find it. Other things we might want to wait for be the event. And I think that's good for now. So let's start coding. We're going to need two functions, one for equipped and one for unequipped. So what I just did is the tool has a function, an event on it called equipped. And so when equipped fires, we connect this function that we're creating right here. So it's a link to this function right here. And so when you equip it, we're going to want to keep track of whether the tool is equipped or not equipped. So we're going to make a value for that. We're probably going to want to figure out who the player is when they equip it. So we should define the character. The character is going to be the script's, the tool's parent. So what happens? We define the character as the tool's parent, and we define the player as players, and then you call the function get player from character, and then you put in the character, and so player is equal to the player of the character. And then we're going to want to, the Mad Bloxxer is probably going to be wanting to run fast, a little bit faster, so that he can catch all the victims, you know. So we're going to need to change his walk speed, and to do that we're going to need to find his humanoid, his or her humanoid. So humanoid equals tool, actually character. So we don't necessarily know if the humanoid is there, so we're just going to do a find first child. Then we're going to check to make sure the humanoid exists. So if humanoid, then if the humanoid doesn't exist, then this will not run. You could also do doesn't equal nil. It's the same thing. When something doesn't exist, it equals nil. So if you're checking if it doesn't equal nil, then that also will be true. But I like to leave it shorthand like this. And then we're going to want to change the walk speed. By default, the humanoid's walk speed is 16. So whenever you join any game on Roblox, your walk speed is going to be 16. And then if the game makes you run faster, it's usually changing your walk speed to something higher. Or if they want to make you slower, it changes it to something lower. So we're going to change that to the current walk speed of the humanoid multiplied by a speed boost. So how much speed boost do we want to give him? Let's go define the speed boost. So actually, let's put this above these variables. The speed boost that we're going to be giving him is 25% faster, or 1.25 multiplied. We're multiplying his current walk speed by 1.25, which makes him 25% faster. Oh, you know what? If the humanoid doesn't exist, let's just set the character to no, just to be safe, so we don't think the character is a character when it's not, because it doesn't have a humanoid. Okay, so that's the equipped function. Let's do an unequipped function. So again, when the unequipped event of the tool fires, it's going to run this function that we're defining right here. And then here we want to again keep track of whether the tool is equipped or not currently. So we're going to do false. Equipped equals false. This is just going to be later. We're going to need this for when we're detecting if the sword hit somebody. Another thing we're going to want to do is set the walk speed back, because we don't want them continually keeping that speed boost. So the humanoid variable was defined over here without a local in front of it, which means that everywhere in the script we can access it. So if the humanoid exists, then humanoid.walk speed, oops, divided by the speed boost. So that should return the character back to the speed at which they were before we equipped the tool. And then we're also going to want to say the character doesn't exist at this point, and that the humanoid doesn't exist at this point. So once you unequip it, the tool doesn't have a character and it doesn't have a humanoid because it's in your backpack. Okay, so here's the good meaty part of a tool, of a sword. When it's touched, it's got to do damage, correct? So handle, we defined handle right here. Dot touched, connect, function, end. So what happens is when the touched event of the part, which is the handle, which is the physical sword in game, when that is touched, we're going to fire this function that we're defining right here. Also, the touched event returns what it hit, and so we're going to name what it hit to just hit. Okay, so the first thing we want to do in this function is check if the tool is equipped. See, before we do the damage, we got to make sure we know what we're dealing the damage to, make sure that the sword is in our hand, and make sure that we have enough HP, we're not like already blocks ourselves. So we're going to make sure that it's equipped, and the character exists, and humanoid exists, and humanoid.health is greater than 0. So if you were to check this before checking to see if the humanoid exists, you would have an error because health is not a valid member of nothing. So that's why we have to check the humanoid before we check the humanoid's health. So we make sure that I'm alive. If I'm the one wielding the sword, we got to make sure that I'm alive, and that I exist, right? Got to make sure the hit exists. And let's make sure that we're not hitting ourselves. How do we do that? A simple way is a simple way of checking if you are hitting yourself is if hit is descendant of. Is descendant of is a function of most things in Roblox. So it means if anything's a child of anything. So this sound is a descendant of sword. Even though it's not directly underneath it, it's still a descendant. So we're kind of doing the same thing here, is we're making sure that hit is a part of not our character. Well, if you want to check if it is your character, you do hit is descendant of character. But since we want to make sure that it's not part of ourself, we just put a not right here. So this would be a true statement if you were hitting yourself, and then not would make it a false statement, which would make it not work. So what we're doing is we're doing the opposite. We're making sure that it's not hitting ourselves. Okay, the next check we might want to do is to see if we're hitting, make sure we're hitting another character with the sword instead of a wall or something that we want to make sure we're hitting something with health. So we're going to look for a humanoid in what we're hitting. So local target humanoid is the hit's parent humanoid. So we're looking for a humanoid in the hit's parent. So most of the time when you're swinging a sword, let's say you hit the left arm of the guy that you're trying to block. Okay, so left arm is directly under their character, so the left arm's parent would be the character, and then inside the character is the humanoid, and so we're searching for the humanoid inside there. If target humanoid, So we're just making sure that this exists. Like this is our search for it, and this is our check to see if it is actually there, if we found it. So if target humanoid, let's also make sure that they haven't already been bloxxed. So if their health is greater than 0. What else might we want to check? I think that's good for now. Okay, so then we want to deal some damage. So take damage is a function of the humanoid on humanoids, and you can just tell it how much damage you want to do, and it safely takes care of it. If they have a shield, it will not deal the damage, which is pretty nice. So let's put the damage in here. Let's define the damage. How much damage do we want a sword to do? Let's just put, I don't know. You can put whatever. If you want it to be an instant kill, most humanoids have 100 max health by default, so you could make your sword blocks people immediately. But we're just gonna put it at 26. Okay, so now if you hit a humanoid, you deal the damage, and that's that. Okay, so one problem with this is that a lot of hit collisions go on. A lot of touched events get fired when you swing your sword through a character. So normally when you swing the sword through a character, hits their left arm, their right arm, maybe one of their legs, their torso, maybe their head, and their other arm. So that's a lot of hit collisions. So you deal like 5 collisions in like one swoop. So we want to make sure that when you swing the sword, it only hits that player one time per swing. So actually, let's define the swing. How do you swing the sword? So luckily, tools have an event called activated. So when the tool is activated, we want to swing the sword. How do we want to do this? So, we want to detect the last time you clicked. So, tick. Tick is a current timer. So this is a timer that's going on forever, and we're just assigning the last click to this timer, so we know we have a timestamp of when you last clicked. You're only going to want to swing the sword so often, so what I'm doing is creating what's normally called a debounce to make sure that something only happens so often. So we're checking to make sure that the last click, actually this should be click delta. Okay, so I've defined click delta as the difference between the time between the current time and the time that you last clicked. So this is how long ago did I last click? That's what click delta is. And so if click delta, if the last time I clicked was more than a second ago, then you're allowed to swing the sword again. So you should only swing the sword once every second. That's what this one right here is. Actually, we can just make this a variable. Swing time. So what this means is you can only swing your sword once every swing time, once every 1 second. We're also going to want to define last click, because right here it's trying to use math on last click when last click doesn't exist. So let's go over here, just define it real quick. Actually, we should we should define this in the equipped. So you can only, so it counts as you can only swing 1 second after you've equipped the sword. So right here. Looks good to me. I'm Stickmasterluke, signing off, and remember, you make the game.